A Capitol Hill tongue lashing as leaders answer more congressional questions on Flint. We'll talk about the investigation, plus a crackdown on medical marijuana shops and the showdown over the Supreme Court. Today is Sunday, March 20th, 2016, and this is Flashpoint. Hello, everybody. I'm Kimberly Gill, and welcome to Flashpoint. Devin is off this week, so yours truly here is holding down the fort. Hope you're having a great Palm Day Sunday. This, of course, means Easter is only 1 week away, and today is the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. So hopefully it means we'll be able to put those winter coats away very, very soon. Well, this week, another round of primaries are in the books. Super Tuesday, Part 3, painted an even clearer picture on where the presidential race is headed. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump scored big wins, putting them one step closer to clinching their party's nominations. Also winning big was Ohio Governor John Kasich. The win of his home state could make a contested convention more likely. Senator Marco Rubio, though, wasn't as lucky to win his home state of Florida. He has now suspended his campaign. Well, right after the primaries, President Obama announced his nomination to fill the seat on the Supreme Court created by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. It has set into motion a standoff with Republicans that could drag out for quite a while. We'll have a discussion about that. Also in Washington, our Kevin Dietz has been in D.C. all week as Governor Snyder and EPA officials testify about the water crisis in Flint. And boy, did they get grilled. We'll talk about that investigation. And back here at home, no doubt you've seen them. They have names like the Green Mile, House of Dank, and the Grass Station. I'm talking about medical marijuana dispensaries. They are everywhere, and Detroit is one of the most laxed cities in Michigan regarding the enforcement of these places. But all of that is about to change. We'll talk to the city's top lawyer about that, all that and more this morning on Flashpoint. Well, first up this morning, Rick Snyder, the governor, appeared before a House Oversight Committee this past week to talk about how his administration handled the Flint water crisis, which, as we know now, resulted in the poisoning of an entire community with lead. So let's talk about it with Detroit Free Press columnist Nancy Kaffer. Thanks so much for being with us. And also joining us is Detroit News business columnist Daniel Howes and our very own Kevin Dietz, who was in Washington, D.C. all this week covering the hearings. Thank you all so much for being with us. So I listened to this thing on the radio. It was intense and just... I don't know about you, and you tell me if I'm right. I felt like the Republicans have tried to deflect some of the blame away from Governor Snyder, while the Democrats, on the other hand, really went in on him, especially Representative Elijah Cummings, who just really nailed him. What are your thoughts, Nancy?
So, I mean, part of the subtext of what's happening here is that there are some factions of the Republican Party that have been gunning for the EPA for a while now. EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy testified beside the governor, and so there was an opportunity there for folks who don't like the EPA to push that agenda. There were also an opportunity for folks who don't like sort of Republican-style governance that Governor Snyder has made the hallmark of administration, running government like a business, sort of folks who could take a swing at that. So there was, you know, at the beginning of the hearing, there were a lot of questions and information brought forward, but my feeling was that as it continued, it evolved into, you know, both sides slamming their chosen wedge, and it got pretty brutal.
It was heated. Daniel, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it was somewhat predictable. This was a lot of theater. We've seen this before in the auto hearings. We've seen it in the ignition switch hearings. You have certain members that will come out and they have to beat up on the witnesses. It's interesting, Elijah Cummings comes out very hard, and he ends the hearing very difficult, being very tough and saying you need to resign. But the day before, he met with the governor in his office for 35 minutes and told him in the meeting, my understanding, I'm going to have to be tough on you tomorrow. So, I mean, some of this they know is coming. The governor was also put through, at a downtown law firm, was put through what a very intense grilling by some lawyers.
Ahead of time, as well as a couple key staff members who intentionally
beat him up in the whole going through questions, trying to get him to anticipate what was coming.
So basically, no surprises.
I didn't think there was a lot of surprises.
Right. Kevin, you were there.
Well, I'll tell you, I was there, and when you sit in the room, you realize how much theater it is, because it's really a public shaming, you know. So they have these prepared speeches, and it's really disappointing because you have the governor there under oath, so it's an opportunity to have him under oath and ask him some real hard questions. But they'd ask a question, and they don't even want to hear an answer. They say, no, don't even give us an answer. I want to yell at you some more, you know, because each person has only 5 minutes, and they want to be heard for the entire 5 minutes. So they don't even let the witnesses answer most of the time.
And the other thing I'm told is that C-SPAN and the cameras, they're always doing tight shots. So you get the impression that the committee table is full, and in a lot of cases,
it's not.
It's not.
Right. So,
isn't that right?
Well, yeah. Yes. In that particular hearing, there were votes, so people did have to go out and vote. So it was kind of empty. On the Tuesday hearing with Darnell Early and Susan Hedman, someone would make their speech and then they would just get up and leave, and they wouldn't even come back. So they weren't there trying to, hold these hearings. They were there to get their 5 minutes.
Let's talk about Gina McCarthy right quick. So she's the EPA director. Do you feel like the governor maybe threw her under the bus a little bit? It sounded like she was kind of placing the blame on him, and he was like, no, that's her.
So there were failures everywhere here. Okay, there were failures at the local level in not applying corrosion control treatment. There was a failure at MDEQ in telling, in not requiring corrosion control, and which is the chemicals that, had they been added to the river water, would have kept lead from leaching into this drinking water. There was failure from the governor's office. They were talking about this stuff, last year, and not demanding action. The EPA knew about this stuff and was saying, well, we told them to start corrosion control. They had powers that they could have used. There's failure everywhere, and blame all up and down the line. Personally, this is the way our government works is that federal agencies are supposed to have more of an oversight role. These things are dealt with on the state level. So it depends on sort of maybe what your ideological bent is as to where you think the majority of blame should be located. But yeah, the governor was definitely trying to spread it down and up.
Right. Well, I think Gina McCarthy was totally unrepentant. I've watched a lot of these and covered them and written about them, and you seldom see a witness that is that snarky with members of Congress. And if they try to get like that, usually they get smacked down. And I think it was a bellwether of kind of how people feel about their own government, frankly. I mean, Nancy's gone through a lot of these documents. We've gone through a lot of these documents. We've seen the documentation that the EPA had and where they were, and the fact of the matter is she was saying things that were not supported by the documentation. I think when they say that they could have helped earlier, they could have. But they didn't, and they relied on practice. They relied on process. It's just like the governor relied on process, and it got him into a lot of trouble. And he said he trusted the experts too much, and I think the evidence suggests that he was absolutely right. He did trust the experts too much, and now he's got a real mess on his hands.
Kevin, you were there. There were a lot of people that traveled all the way from Flint to Washington, D.C. to hear this. Do you think they got the answers that they wanted?
No, they didn't, and they're worried. Afterwards they said, geez, when the cameras go away now, are people going to stay committed to helping Flint? And they have a right to feel that way. When the EPA director is sitting there and refusing to say we did anything wrong, it's hard to feel like someone's going to come and help you. And I mean, it almost felt to me like she was ordered by someone not to say that they held any responsibility, like they didn't want to get on the hook for paying for all of it or something. I mean, it almost felt that way, because you could have said, look, yes, we take some responsibility because we knew and we didn't tell the public. Right. That's all she had to say.
So, but I mean, part of the issue there, though, is that there's a real sentiment among some of the right-wing members of Congress to take the EPA out. It's one of the agencies that gets listed as one that you would get rid of by right-wingers. So she's in a position there where she's got a very fine needle to thread here. And one of the representatives, a Democratic representative from Missouri who is doing some questioning, pointed out there's a real hypocrisy here in Republican lawmakers screaming at a federal agency for not exercising more control. This is something that these folks are allergic to the concept of, but when it's politically expedient, because it fits into this narrative of anti-EPA, then they're using this. But the issue isn't that Flint needed less government oversight. There's no way you can look at this and say less oversight would have been helpful. It needed better oversight.
Right.
The government
they do their
worked.
job.
Daniel, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, I was going to say that was William Lacey Clay, and she's right. She's absolutely right. But look, if there's one thing that the government oversight I think we would agree on is important, is water. It's infrastructure issues. I mean, come on. These people on the right that are going after this kind of thing and use it as a whipping boy have to come to terms with the fact that there are roles for the government, and this, I think, is one of those examples.
Absolutely. Okay, we have to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much. And up next, folks, we'll talk about the crackdown on medical marijuana shops in Detroit. We'll be back in a moment. A proliferation of pot shops in the city of Detroit prompted a new ordinance to regulate them. Corporation Counsel Butch Hollowell joins me now to talk about what the city is doing about this and why. And Butch, I'm sure you're probably up to your ears in weed right about now.
That's about right, yeah.
So let's just talk about the regulations. What are they? And you've got this deadline coming up here pretty soon.
Right. Because of the law which allows medical marijuana in the state of Michigan, the city of Detroit decided under Councilman James Tate's leadership to have an ordinance in place for what we call dispensaries, where patients can come get their marijuana. And so on December 17th, the City Council passed two ordinances, one for licensing, the other one for zoning. It went into effect on March 1st. And that means that the applications began to come in, and there's a 30-day process for them to complete those applications. You have to meet zoning requirements, which means you can't be 1,000 feet from a church, a school, a park, playground, or a drug-free zone, or from another controlled use, like another medical marijuana center, or even a party store or a liquor store.
So how many would you say are in compliance right now?
None. I've sent a letter to each of the 211 facilities that are up and operating within the city of Detroit, that they are operating at their own risk, quote unquote, because until you've gone through the city's entire process of submitting a site plan, a security plan, making sure that you're within the right boundaries. So it's only M1 through M4, which is an industrial zone, and B2 and B4, which is commercial zones, can you be? And so we think that when you go through that entire application process, I think there'll probably be room for about 40 of those facilities in the city.
So do these new regulations then set a cap on the number that is allowed?
It's a natural cap, right? I mean, so if there's only so many that will fit within those zoning categories, then it's a natural cap. So far we've had 133 applications that have been submitted. 60 of those are in drug-free zones, so that's not going to work. And what we're noticing is that 71% of them are from individuals that do not live in the city of Detroit.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. People who have invested a lot of money into their businesses. Kevin Dietz did a story last week where this one guy said he spent $100,000 fixing up his building. What are those business owners? Are they just left with that loss?
Well, you know, the thing is that you have to have certain licenses in order to do business. You have to have a certificate of occupancy. You have to have a certificate of compliance. And so if you just open it up, but you're not asking the buildings department to give you the necessary permits, then again, you're not opening up lawfully. So you make that kind of investment, again, at your own risk if you don't make sure that they're coming in and making sure that your HVAC systems are working and the other kinds of things that are needed for you to be in compliance with city codes. So in that respect, you couldn't have gotten a medical marijuana license before these March 1. So they're operating at their own risk.
Sure. There's been some talk about some of the owners coming together and starting a petition. Do you know anything about that?
I do, and they did file petitions, but I wrote an opinion indicating that they were too late. So they, under state law, had to file on the zoning part within 7 days of the publication date of the ordinance, which was back in January. And on the licensing part, they had to file on or before the effective date. And they filed on the effective date, which made them a day late.
What do you say to the people that believe these dispensaries are actually doing something good for the community? Because a lot of these places, quite frankly, have very good security. Some of them have gone through a lot to build up their buildings. And some people say, well, that will maybe bring the property values up. What do you think about that?
Maybe so. And that's why we're doing this process, so that you go through the process, all the proper applications, make sure that you're following your requirements for a site plan, security plan, and if you're operating appropriately, then we will allow you to do so.
So what happens April 1st?
April 1st, then we'll take a look at what we have in terms of the applications. We'll look at who is in compliance and who isn't. And then the police department, as well as the building safety and engineering department, along with my department, law department, will make an analysis on how we begin to enforce.
Okay. All right, we'll have to leave it there, Butch. We appreciate it so much. And coming up next, the political fight surrounding President Obama's pick for Supreme Court justice is growing. We'll talk about that with a legal expert coming up next. Stay with us. Judge Merrick Garland has been the Supreme Court nominee for less than a week, but already finds himself in the middle of a bitter partisan fight. Judge Garland made his first trip to Capitol Hill earlier in the week to somewhat lobby for himself with Democratic senators, but some Republicans, like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, they're saying they won't even meet with the guy. So joining me now to talk more about this is Larry Dubin. He's a law professor at University of Detroit Mercy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what we know about Judge Garland. He's qualified. By all means, he seems able to do the job. He's a decent person. The president has touted his resume. So let's talk a little bit about him.
Well, he's been an appellate judge for almost 20 years. He was involved in major criminal cases. He had been a prosecutor. Is totally respected by both sides of the political aisle. Has not been involved in extremely controversial cases, but is kind of the middle of the road from an ideological perspective. Sure. So I think each side can like him for certain things and possibly have some concerns for other cases that he's been involved in. But in terms of, to give you an idea of the clerks that he's had since he's been on the Court of Appeals, the justices of the Supreme Court love to get Judge Garland's clerks to become their clerks because of how much they learn from him. So he's respected by everyone on the court.
But he's taking heat from both sides of the aisle. There are liberals who feel like, you know, President Obama maybe could have selected somebody more diverse because he is a white man. He's 63, and they're going, you know, maybe you could have gotten somebody, maybe a woman, maybe somebody African-American. And then on the Republican side, you have Mitch McConnell who's saying, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this guy. I'm not even going to meet with him.
Well, I think that's why President Obama selected the right person. Had he selected someone who was too liberal, there would be no opportunity for that person ever to go through. He picked a judge who really is acknowledged by Republicans and Democrats as being clearly competent to be on the United States Supreme Court, so that the position against Judge Garland could only be a political one. It can't be based on his qualifications, and that's really what it's turned out to be.
Mitch McConnell talked about something called the Biden rule. It was something I'd never heard of, and he says there will be no hearing for Judge Garland citing this Biden rule. What does that mean?
Well, there is no Biden rule. What he's referring to is a speech that Joe Biden made many years ago when I believe it was Ronald Reagan's term was coming to a close, and he was talking essentially about the fact that if an opening on the court comes in the middle of the summer of a presidential campaign, that going through the process that the Senate has to go through in vetting a prospective candidate could get in the way of politics at that point. He certainly wasn't talking about a situation where a Supreme Court justice dies almost a year before the president's term runs out, and it was purely hypothetical. There was no actual circumstance that existed when he made that statement.
Right. Well, we should point out that there are some Republicans who have said that they will meet with him, yes. And particularly Chuck Grassley, who says, hey, you know what, I can meet with dictators in foreign countries. Why not? I can meet with this guy. He's a decent guy. Why do you think that is? Do you think that some of the Republicans are kind of softening their stance, or is it because maybe they're up for a re-election?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. I think some really understand that not following at least the normal procedures for a Supreme Court nominee by the president is wrong. It's just not the right, it's not the right legal precedent to set. The Constitution is very clear. Republicans usually try to get a candidate who is an originalist, who believes in interpreting the Constitution as it was meant to be observed by those who drafted it. And this language is very clear. So I think some of them just feel it's wrong. I think others feel a political motivation in running in the fall that it could work against them from their states, and they don't want to lose their Senate seat.
Sure. So what are the possible fates for the Garland nomination? Do you think it would ever be a situation where President Obama just said, I'm just going to withdraw, and Hillary Clinton wins in November, and then she nominates somebody that's more liberal?
Well, I think that's the risk that Republicans are taking, that if they don't vet Judge Garland, then they do run the risk of Hillary Clinton becoming president and putting forth a more liberal candidate. And I think that will show that it was simply a bad judgment on their part to not engage in the normal process.
What about a lame duck vote? Do you think that would happen?
I think that irritates everybody because it's illegitimate to say he's really qualified, but we're not going to say so until after the election. If he's qualified, a president under the Constitution has the responsibility to nominate someone, and I think the president took into account the fact that he has to respect the power, Republican power in the Senate in approving Judge Garland, and that's why he picked someone like him rather than a more liberal candidate.
Do you think it would ever be a situation where the GOP would budge just a little bit by giving him a hearing and maybe even a vote, but then voting him down? Do you think it would go that far?
Well, I think the danger of doing that is if they gave him a hearing, he would come across really well. There's no question about that. I don't think there are any secrets in his background that are going to emerge. And then if they vote him down, they're doing so on the merits. Now it's easier for them to say, this has nothing to do with Judge Garland. This simply has to do with the fact that we're not going to vet any candidate that the president puts forth because we should wait till after the election.
Just curious, what usually is the average time from nomination to confirmation? Is that?
Yeah, I would say usually between 60 and 90 days.
Okay.
And that's why they're saying that they would expect the president and the people who are supporting Judge Garland that this should be taken care of by Memorial Day.
Okay. All right, well, we appreciate it very much. You do have the Constitution.
I do indeed, right here.
Right there in your hand. We have one of the clause, or a clause from it, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. It says, the president shall nominate by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and counsels, judges of the Supreme Court. And I emphasize advice and consent of the Senate.
And that's as clear as it can be. There's
clear.
Nothing that needs to be interpreted by that.
That's very clear. Okay,
Yes,
we'll have to leave it there. Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much
you.
for joining us. And a big thank you to all of our guests today. And thank you for joining us for Flashpoint. Meet the Press is next, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Have a great day, everybody.